All of America is dealing with the public health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. Black America has to deal with another public health pandemic of police brutality. This is the tipping point. This is the tipping point for policing in America. This is a public health crisis. Recently, there was a study by the American Journal of Public Health that found black men were killed by the police 3.5 times more than white men. Now, I know it has been said that the police kill more white people. But we have to put this in context. We have to put this in context. Black people in America make up 13% of the population, while white people in America make up 73% of the population. We have to keep these statistics in context. It's important that we look at how black people are profiled by the police. We look at the statistics as it relates when the police kill citizens. Are they armed or are they unarmed? Because if you're gonna tell the story correctly and put it in context. Because now is the time to finally deal with this pandemic once and for all of police brutality and racism and discrimination in our criminal justice system. This is the time. This is a teachable moment for America. This is an opportunity for police officers to bridge that divide of mistrust with communities of color, where we have transparency plus accountability equals trust. This is the time for all the world that is watching to have this lawsuit address the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is this: does America believe the words of Thomas Jefferson? Do they believe the preamble to the Declaration of Independence? Does America really believe it when they quote Does America really believe Thomas Jefferson's words? Do they believe the preamble to the Declaration of Independence when they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Do America really believe it, or does it just sound good? We know you can quote it, but America, do you believe it? That is what we document and discuss in this federal wrongful death civil rights lawsuit on behalf of George Floyd and all of his children. It's an important discussion that we must have in America. Finally, we must deal with this issue. George Floyd, tragic death, horrific death, his torture has finally given us the opportunity to address this issue head on, not only in Minneapolis, but all the way to Washington, D.C. and all around the world. You will hear from Attorney Tony Romanucci, and then you will hear from Attorney Chris Stewart, and then at that time, we will take some of your questions. Thank you so much for covering this important matter, not only on behalf of the family of George Floyd, but on behalf of so many unknown hashtags that we have long forgotten in America. This is our time. Mr. Romanucci?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Romanucci. I'm one of the attorneys for the George Floyd family. I thank Ben Crump and my colleague Chris Stewart and all the other attorneys who are with me here today. I start off by reminding you that W.E. Du Bois said that liberty is defined as the right to breathe. If you understand that quote, you will understand this lawsuit. The city of Minneapolis made choices long ago. They made choices to train their officers in a manner in which is inconsistent with human dignity, inconsistent with human life. Those police officers who knelt on the neck of George Floyd and who knelt on his back also made choices. Those choices that they made lasted 526 seconds. All they had to do is let up on one of those seconds and George Floyd might be alive. Instead, what they did is they removed the choice that George Floyd had to live or die. They removed the choice that George Floyd, that he was begging, pleading for the right to breathe, something that our brains do without even thinking. George said please numerous times. Had those police officers listened once, known that the right to breathe is liberty, George Floyd would be alive. We would not be standing here before you today. Every second, every tick of that clock was a constitutional violation against George Floyd. Every tick of the clock was one more moment that George Floyd was not free to leave. Every tick of the clock was one more moment that George Floyd was closer to death because his choice for life was being removed from him because of the unconstitutionality of the training that Minneapolis had taught their officers over years and years, that it was okay to kneel on the neck of unrestrained or restrained, nonviolent, compliant offenders. And George Floyd was all of those, except that he never gave up a fundamental right to breathe. That was taken away from him. The city of Minneapolis crossed that bridge. They crossed the bridge of unconstitutional training, and they opened up the gates for those officers to do what they did to George Floyd. Not only did they open the gates, they kept them open because, listen, folks, Minneapolis has been doing this for years and years. They've been doing this to the marginalized people. They've been doing this to black men for years. This is how those officers were taught, because in the eyes of the Minneapolis Police Department and those officers that day, they didn't heed the words of Thomas Jefferson. George Floyd was not created equal to them. They saw him as a different human being, a different person without dignity. This lawsuit is about the violations of the Fourth Amendment. It's about the violations of the 14th Amendment against the city of Minneapolis and its police department. It's about the unconstitutional search and seizure. It's about deliberate indifference. It's about the right to seek justice. Now, I've talked to you about choices that were made. Choices that were made in the past. Those by Minneapolis, those by the police department, and those that George Floyd did not have on the day that he was killed on May 25th. There's one other choice to be made, and that's by the city of Minneapolis. As we seek justice, will they participate in that justice? Will they also ensure that this is done right? Not only for the monetary purpose, but are they going to ensure that they protect every member of the community and then send a message out across the country with a pipeline to Washington, D.C., all the way to California, that this cannot happen again. The tipping point has arrived. We will not allow that scale to go backwards in time. We will only allow it to go forward and ensure that justice is received here. On behalf of the Floyd family, the children, and anybody who has an interest in this, which is really not only the city of Minneapolis, but our entire country, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. I introduce to you Attorney Chris Stewart.
Good afternoon, everybody. Attorney Chris Stewart, Trial Attorneys. What the world should really understand when these civil lawsuits are filed is it's not just a money grab. It's not really even just about that. It is about accountability. We're tired of seeing African Americans be pacified with simply an arrest. That's fine. But we want the full prosecution, and we also want the city to understand responsibility. And cities and companies only talk in dollar bills, sadly. And that's what a civil suit only has the remedy to do. We've heard the positive words from around this country and around the world. Politicians, the mayor here, the governor, city council, everyone understanding that what happened to George Floyd was torture and that Black lives matter. Well, this team here is to make sure that Black worth matters. We're to ensure that the amount given in this case at the end of the day is commensurate with what he went through, being tortured to death. You will not walk away from these situations anymore in this country with a simple arrest and get over it. You will feel the pain and the understanding of having to account for the actions of your officers. And the only way that's done is with financial responsibility. You're not going to just walk away because the victim was African American anymore, because these lawsuits will be coming. And then you're going to have to come before all of the media and go against all the sympathy and all of the well wishes that you had for the family as an elected official, and go reverse and fight all of us in court. So it's really just about being true. If you do think that Black lives matter, then understand that we're going to make sure that there is a Black worth and value behind that. We're not walking away silently anymore after arrests. So that's the purpose of this, and to ensure that their families are taken care of forever, and to ensure that this stops, as Ben said. Because I guarantee you another city won't allow someone like Derek Chauvin, who's a training officer, to be on their force for so long with that type of behavior if they know at the end of the day they got to write a check. Because that's what they care about more than all of this. And we understand that language. So the general public may not, but to get full change, it's marching in the streets, but it's also marching into that courtroom in a civil case. And that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tony. We will take some of your questions now.
Attorney Crump, we just saw some of the body cam video of the officers involved in the arrest. And a couple of points that stand out from that body cam video is one, Mr. Floyd begins saying that he cannot breathe long before he was on the ground. And two, there seems to be a couple of efforts by Officer Lane in this case to express some concern and help him breathe. Does that change anything?
Well, as Attorney Romanucci and Attorney Stewart just articulated, it's this deliberate indifference. Even with him saying, I can't breathe, they still put him face down, had him handcuffed. He was clearly restrained. As Attorney Jeff Storms litigated in the David Smith case, this was nothing new for the city of Minneapolis. It was, in fact, foreseeable that if they didn't address this issue, what happened to George Floyd or somebody like George Floyd was predictable. And so these officers who were all trained as first responders, who were all trained to be able to de-escalate situations, what we see on the body cam video and what we hear on the body cam video tells us the policies and procedures that they in fact followed, despite what they're going to try to tell us in court that they trained them to do. And that's what this lawsuit is about, as my co-counsel so ably articulated. It really is about trying to change the culture and the behavior of policing. You know, we would have hoped that George Floyd did not have to sacrifice his life to bring about these changes. But now we're here, and we're at a tipping point, Minneapolis.
Why would the city of Minneapolis and the city council and the mayor, in such a liberal and open-minded city, and that is their reputation, very liberal up here, why would they sit for how long on wording in their use of force policy? Why would they sit, and how many other governments, large and small, from villages to big cities across this country, are sitting right now with wording and language that allows what happened to George Floyd?
That is a great question, and this great team of lawyers, we're going to address that head on. Because really, we've been talking about the deliberate indifference of the police officers. I think we can add that it's the deliberate indifference also of the elected officials cozying up to the police unions, not wanting to put the safety and the protection of the citizens paramount. And so that's an issue that we have to address. I don't know if Attorney Stewart and Attorney Romanucci want to.
I mean, we all handle these across the country, and the one thing we have to look at immediately is the use of force policy. Most of them are extremely vague. They have loopholes. They're not written clearly. I even talked to some of the officers who don't fully even understand what they're trying to say, what they can and can't do, because they're so vague. But they're done on purpose. Because if they're strict, if they're tight, if they are rules and regulations of exactly what you can and cannot do, we wouldn't be here today. But it's open and vague to allow for that behavior to happen.
Hold on, let Tony address that.
And what have they said?
They obviously saw the video. They have not heard all of the audio. And if this was your loved one, how would it make you feel? A person who you grew up with as a little boy, who was your role model, your protector, to see him being tortured. I mean, let's talk about what this was. This was torture. People ask me, why do you think the George Floyd killing has galvanized people around the globe? It is because he was literally tortured to death, not in a third world country, but here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States of America in 2020. And why? We submit to you, it had a lot to do with the color of his skin. And that's why there's a public health crisis that we in Black America have to deal with, on top of dealing with the public health crisis of the coronavirus. Because everything seemed to have stopped and got shut down in America during the coronavirus pandemic, except racism and discrimination and police brutality against Black and brown people in America. Tony wanted to address that last question.
That use of force question is very important, because the use of force, police we know are allowed to use force, but only commensurate with the force that is used against them. That's why it's called a continuum scale. And there's a scale in which you're supposed to follow, that if somebody continues to resist or is running away or is using some sort of force against you, that you're allowed to use a certain amount of force back. But when you look at this event, George Floyd was prone on the ground, where there was force coming up from the ground, force being pressed on his back. He was compliant, he was restrained. Therefore, the force that the police were using turned into deadly force. They didn't have to use their gun on him, or a taser, or a shotgun. That knee became deadly force with every second that ticked away. Every second that ticked away, that was a Fourth Amendment violation. Now, please keep in mind, this is the civil case. The burden of proof on a civil case for the Fourth Amendment is a preponderance of the evidence standard. That means the way we explain it in court, if somebody tips the scales of justice this so much, we prove our case. On the 14th Amendment, it's deliberate indifference. It's a little bit of a different standard. On the criminal case, this is not the criminal case. That's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a significant different standard. We're not here to talk about the criminal case. We're here to talk about the civil standards, the use of force that was used against them that turned into deadly force, which killed them because of training policies. Training policies that were bargained into the union contract, which gives away the ability for police officers to be accountable for their behavior and for Minneapolis to be less transparent. You're right. They have a reputation for being liberal, but if you don't change the use of force policies and train, you will have continued failures, as in the death of George Floyd.
Mr. Crump,
just to clarify, as a family attorney, have you been able to see the body camera video that was released or that we were allowed to see today? And then just if I can add on, can you clarify, because this is a civil case, does this normally happen in terms of timing? Does it need to wait until the criminal case is done?
Well, that's going to be a decision made by the judge, because oftentimes justice delayed is justice denied. We have cases where black people were killed on video, and 5 years has eclipsed, and still no civil justice. I know Chris knows that he's fighting with Alton Sterling. So these things are literally left up to the judge. You have cases that happen, like Stephon Clark, within the 12 months. They are resolved when cities want to try to do the right thing, when they want to try to send the message that we care about all life. And so it really is, as Tony and Chris were saying, Mayor Fry and the city commission and the elected officials who said all those things, those attributes, the outrage about the tragic killing of George Floyd, let's see their actions match their words. And I like, as Chris said, show black worth, because far too often the reason we have to keep chanting Black Lives Matter is because some of our brothers and sisters in America, they can quote the Declaration of Independence, but it really is, do you believe it? Do you really believe minorities and people of color are equal and deserving of equal consideration? Because we know if that would have been somebody else besides a black man, on their face, handcuffed, and a knee on the neck in the back for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, my Lord.
Mr. Crump, what about...
Video, can you answer that aspect? Have you been able to see the body camera?
We're set to see the body cam video. We haven't seen it yet.
What about medical training, Mr. Crump? Because more than one officer appears to think that he's not going to die. Mr. Floyd isn't going to pass away because he's able to talk.
Okay, yeah, I'll briefly mention, and I'll allow my co-counsels to also address that issue. But it is clear that the audio tells us the mentality of what they're thinking. When one of the officers say, I believe he's having a medical crisis, and what is Officer Chauvin's response? Well, that's why the ambulance is coming. You know, he doesn't take his knee off his neck, even though lay people can appreciate the medical crisis that he's going through. The fact that they're saying he can't breathe. They're saying that he's passed out. They're saying that you're killing him. Even George Floyd is telling them they're going to kill me. If that is not an indication that this is a serious medical crisis from people who are supposed to be trained as first responders, it is absolutely the textbook definition of deliberate indifference. And the only question is, why would they treat this human being like that in America in 2020? Again, we are talking about this public health crisis that black people have to deal with. that has been going on far longer than the coronavirus, called police brutality. Either y'all want to address that medical? Okay, come on, Jeff, after Chris.
Just briefly, it's very important, that question that was asked is, do we have to fight this case, for years and years and years? The answer to that is no. This case could be resolved in 30 days if city council and the mayor wanted it to be. It's about what do they care and how do they envision George Floyd. It's simple as that. I've had some that have resolved in 60 days or 30 days because they cared about the case. I've had some that have taken 4 or 5 years because they knew that they can outweight all of the media and outweight all the protesters, and you'll be gone in a few years. So it's really about who your elected officials are and what they care about. So we can wait and go to trial. We've all racked up some massive numbers at trial before. If they want to do that, that's fine. Or if they want to come and sit down and talk and show respect for George Floyd, we're open to that also.
Attorney Crump,
Hold on 1 second. Jeff Storms, and then I'll get right to you.
I just wanted to address the question on the medical training because it's something we've historically seen here before. When they killed David Smith, the chief of police disclaimed the level of training they had with respect to medical care and medical treatment. So our police department has been empowered to be able to use deadly force to take people's lives, but then when it comes time to pay attention to their medical condition, to make sure that their well-being is cared for, they disclaim the knowledge and the training that they've had, and their leaders help them excuse that. And we've seen that historically in this city for years, and I think that was a very important question that you asked.
Attorney Crump over here, Paul Bloom with the local Fox affiliate. I saw you in the courthouse a couple of weeks ago. You were here, I thought perhaps maybe having meetings. Were you in fact just doing some research legally here, or you were already in meetings with local officials? And secondly, this community went through a significant blow several years ago. Justine Wuschek, Damon shot and killed. There was a $20 million lawsuit settlement the city agreed to soon after the criminal trial. Could you talk about that case and how that may set up a precedent-setting one that you're interested in with George Floyd?
Well, what's your name again?
Paul
Paul.
Bloom.
Now, Paul, you don't expect these team of lawyers to give up our strategy, do you? No, seriously, we've been working nonstop day and night on this case in Minneapolis and outside of Minneapolis. In fact, giving testimony before Congress and talking with the senators and so forth to achieve real systematic reform. As Chris and Tony have said, it really is up to the city at this point as to do they want to be part of the solution here. Because this is a teachable moment for America. I mean, the whole world is watching Minneapolis, Minnesota. The whole world is watching the leadership. Their political legacies are going to be defined by how they showed and demonstrated responsible leadership on this horrific death. And so when you think about the precedents that were set with the Diamond case and other cases, we know that this is an unprecedented case, and we, with this lawsuit, do want to set a precedent to make it financially prohibitive, that the police won't kill marginalized people and black people in the future in America. And so we have to try to make it financially disadvantaged. Forgive me. I want to say something very clear here. We want to disincentivize them financially to do their job of training the officers, because the hashtags are happening so fast in America that we can't keep up with them. We are seeking to make sure that justice is done by the family of George Floyd. Last question?
Yeah, you mentioned it being financially disincentive, financially prohibitive. And then the lawsuit mentions a number of other cases that were large amounts. And you would say that so far they haven't been financially prohibitive then?
Well, you know, the real issue is how much do cities and municipalities have to pay to tell their police departments that enough is enough. We are not going to use excessive fatal force when it comes to killing black and brown people and marginalized people, because the history of America has been that they could do that and nobody would be held accountable, whether criminal or civil. So this is the tipping point. I mean, this George Floyd tragedy that has been seen now almost 1 billion times, that video has been seen all over the world. If we don't get this right, then we're going to see not only more cities burning in America, but we're going to see people heartbroken. Can you imagine his family? Can you imagine his children looking at that video with him being tortured to death by the people who are supposed to protect and serve them? If this was your father or your brother or your sister or your husband or your wife, what amount would it take to say justice? What amount? That is what we intend to put before the city of Minneapolis, either with the city commission or in the great halls of justice, where last time I checked, George Floyd, as a black man, still was an American citizen who deserved every constitutional right, in fact was entitled to it. Do America believe, in the words of Thomas Jefferson?
Your observation that there have been many settlements like this in the past, what that is, if you read the complaint, you'll see that's what's called ratified behavior. It's a learned behavior that if you will be covered for, you will be protected, we will pay for you, and at a certain point, that has to stop, right? Or else the behavior continues, unless you're taught otherwise. And in Minneapolis Police Department officers, especially one like Derek Chauvin, who's had, 18 or 20 citizen complaints, and none of them where he has been meaningfully disciplined, that's what results in ratified behavior, learned behavior. So what Ben and Chris are saying, that unless we stop ratified behavior, that list will continue. We'll keep adding to that list of numbers over and over again until there's a number where everybody wakes up and says, we have to turn this police department upside down on its training and make sure that everybody understands what the rules are. I haven't seen anybody run red lights. I've only seen people go through green lights. Police officers need to follow those same rules of the Minneapolis Police Department as we do in everyday life.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. If you have any additional questions or you need the complaint or press release, email press@bencrump.com and we'll get you what you need. Thank you.